we go. So, Bishop, if you would like to open us with prayer and then your opening comments.
Thank you very much, Alec, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to the budget consultation session. As Alec was saying, we've had to sort of make a lot of adjustments on the fly since about 7 o'clock this morning in terms of how we wanted to do this. And as he mentioned, Wayne and Alec and I were part of a conference that took place earlier this week, and people have tested positive for that. The positive not for the conference, but for COVID at the conference, and although it was a very positive conference, I must say, but coming back. So I've tested a couple of times day before yesterday, and I tested this morning. I'm testing negative, don't have any symptoms, and Wayne in the same boat, but Alec has tested positive. So we made these adjustments, and thank you very much for your forbearance with this, and we move on. I guess that's the blessing of the technology we've been utilizing over these past couple of years, because we can pivot rather quickly from different modes of trying to gather together to be able to achieve the goals that we want. And the goal today is to discuss our priorities for the budget for 2023. And just before I offer prayer, I want to share with you, this is my favorite stewardship passage, because all of this conversation, beginning with the priorities and moving through to later on when we start talking about the nuts and bolts of the finance piece of it and the allocation of funds in the budget. Today is a priority session, but it all is under that general heading and rubric of stewardship, and called to be good stewards of the gifts that we have been given. And my absolute favorite stewardship passage is from 2 Corinthians 9. And I want to share that with you before I offer prayer today. So St. Paul writes to the Corinthian church and says, the point is this: the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the one who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance, so that by always having enough of everything, you may share abundantly in every good work. As it is written, he scatters abroad, he gives to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way for your great generosity, which will produce thanksgiving to God through us. For the rendering of this ministry not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also overflows with many thanksgivings to God. Through the testing of this ministry, you glorify God by your obedience to the confession of the gospel of Christ, and by the generosity of your sharing with them and with all others, while they long for you and pray for you because of the surpassing grace of God that he has given to you. Thanks be to God for this indescribable gift. And as we gather today, I'm focusing within that, really, in that passage that says, for the rendering of this ministry. And a priority session is all about defining and understanding what this ministry is, to which we need to supply seed for the sower, for the needs of the saints. So let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you praise and thanksgiving for the gift of a beautiful day, and for the opportunity that we have to come together in joy and excitement to consider the ministry that has been entrusted to us, the stewardship of the resources committed to our care within the parishes of the Diocese of Ontario. We pray that you will be present here with us in this Pentecost season by the power of your Spirit that guides us forward into the future, that you would have us in the path that you would have us travel. Help us to understand the priorities that you set before us in the ministries that we undertake. Inspire us to speak into those priorities. Inspire us to be faithful to our calling, and help us to move forward in the direction that you would have us go. For you have always promised, as the psalmist writes, to be the light and lamp for our path and our feet. And in that great spirit we trust this day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm looking forward to the conversation today and hearing the input that you will bring to the meeting. And we continue to move along. So, Alec, I'll throw it back over to you.
Thank you, Bishop. So as we look at what we're trying to achieve in the next couple of hours, this is a key piece of input to the 2023 budget process. And we'll talk about that, the bigger process in a moment, but that to itself is an important part. The second thing is it does give Synod Council, as they consider the 2023 budget, both in terms of the steps along the way, providing direction or guidance, and then ultimately approval. This forms part of the data and input. It's about listening and consulting. It's about making sure that there's the opportunity to speak, to ask questions, and to consult into the process. And then finally, it helps achieve better communications, better understanding across what is in the budget and what we're all doing in our ministry together. Again, please excuse my voice. I do have a bit of a frog going on with the bug, and occasionally will cough. So I apologize in advance and ask for your indulgence as we go. So budget. And it's here we sit in the beautiful days of the middle of 2022, and we're into budget. So this by itself is part of the process because it takes us time to get there. This is not something that gets done quickly. It is something that takes some time. And that's because there's many reasons why we do a budget. And those are a mixture. First of all, as the bishop talked, there is a very real piece of stewardship, very real piece of working together around what is God calling us to do. There is the part that reminds us, while we tend to focus on our limitations, that we are provided with great abundances as well, and how we approach that. It's a management tool. It allows us to measure. It allows us to know where approvals lie, the boundaries, if you will. It allows for governance, again, as a tracking and comparative tool. Through it, we try and make sure that there is transparency, that it's comprehensive, that it tries to include everything we can, that it's responsible. And obviously our usual goal is to balance income and expenditure. And finally, that it reflects that we've got abundance everywhere, but we've also got challenges at the congregational level, at the parish or the regional level, and at the diocesan level. Again, my quote that I still like is, for which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it. Again, that's part of us with the stewardship of what we've all been given. So the process is a familiar one for us. We have three main phases. There is input, consultation and guidance, and approval. And so what we're doing is we've not put the committee requests out yet because we wanted to get through this session first, because this session may help frame what we ask of our committees and groups of the diocese in terms of them asking for specific, setting up what they wish to do next year and what support they may need. This session is obviously central to that. And the other part of it is, of course, we have all kinds of what I call mechanical things as we look at the things inside the system. We know what a lot of the costs that make up and how those are going to go. You know, we can work through what inflation looks like. We can look at timing of certain things. So there's a lot of things that are the mechanical side that's done by the finance staff. We'll then go back to council and provide an update, look for guidance. And then once we get a package together, and the plan would be in September, there will then be another consultation session where we would actually say, this is what the draft or the proposed looks like. And that then, this is a non-synod year, will go to synod council for approval. And we normally target that for October, because November is the fallback. November is typically the last meeting that council comes together unless there's an emergency. So we like to, even though November's the real date, we try and get it targeted for October. That way, if we miss, we still have the November meeting to catch. And so that's where we sit this year. So today's meeting, as I mentioned, is not a numbers meeting. I'll give you a little bit of proportion, but we're not going to sit here and say, how much are we putting into any given point? This is about what are the priorities, right? And so that's different than saying we should have $100 more here or $100 less there. But we really want to focus at what the things are that are important within the context of where we are right now. And that is, in terms of, we've come out of 2022, we will have a deficit coming out of that year, and that affects context. There's the context of our churches coming through and recovering from COVID. There's a continuing sets of needs we have. So we have to look at the context of where we are. This is a wide range. In 2 hours, we're going to cover a large watershed. There's a great number of things that go into what we do as a diocese. Some things that are obvious and seen, others that are under the covers. There's a wide range of opinions. Everyone has different perspectives on what's most important. Everyone has perspectives on what their church needs, what their church doesn't need, what we should be doing within any given topic. So one of the things we're going to do is this will be recorded, transcribed. It'll allow those that either can't attend today to watch it, then input to it over the next few weeks, or for some of you that may want to replay it and re-listen to it and rethink it, that's perfectly valid too. But the goal of it is to ensure that we get as much input as we can. So just the quick ground rules for us. This is the context of 2023 planning, budget, and our plans for the year. And it's a step, though, in where we go beyond 2023. We're on a continuum and a pathway forward. Let's try and avoid sacred cows all the way around and have an open discussion. At the same time, we want to avoid axe grinding. We all have things that we have particular points or particular things, not dealing with specifics of certain things, but focusing on what's possible, what the alternatives are, and how to solve things. I want to be an open and direct, but of course, polite dialogue. And then finally is, things are tight within the meeting. We have to kind of watch timelines, can't get bogged into specific areas. There may be areas we decide to dig into separately, but we have a large area across the total expanse, and you'll see that in a few moments. So the way we've kind of structured this is as we work our way through the overview, the starting point, we'll then do quick, sort of here's the areas, there's 10 of them. And we'll quickly go through those just in terms of giving you the frame of what they are. And then spend an hour really looking at what do we do more of, what do we do less of, and what else. Then we'll pull it together at the back end and look where needed at any follow-ups that need to be done. As always, we'll end with grace and with the grace. Quite sure I thought I'd fix that. So, that, of course, is our diocesan strategy, as everyone knows. And we continue with that as our path forward. Not going to dig into it, despite Wayne's great commentary underneath. We will continue to move forward with this vision and strategy. The core of it, of course, is one of the big shifts for us as we look at financial, has been shifting from maintenance to mission. And how do we build our future? And how do we let the things, the seeds we've planted, take root and grow? Over the last 10 years or so, we've gone through a fair bit. We have had to restructure financially. We've had to do closures, we've suspended things, we've consolidated things, we've had to reinvent the way we do some things. We've had to do expense avoidance in places. We've tried to shift more into ministry investments. And of course, we've had to deal with the pandemic. And so all of that continuum has been part of the path that we've worked through in the last 10 years. One of the key things we did was reducing what were big, unpredictable costs. Camp Hyanto, once the decision is made to close, once the decision was made to open the camp in a given year, we really were committed at that point, and there's not much you can do. You live with it, and you have to follow on and deal with the financial at the back end of it. Similarly, the church book room and the Diocesan Center, where we were looking at some major expense. So what we've done is, over the last number of years, is reduce those major expenditures and shifted out of a lot of expenses that we simply could not prioritize and maintain. For 2021, we ran a surplus. 2022, Senate approved a budget that included a deficit. And that's on the operating side. What we basically have done is used our surplus to help balance into the next year. So 2022 and 2021, and what we know right now is we are tracking slightly better than the budget. So the deficit is lower than we expected. It is materially lower, but not significantly lower. But we are, I think the message for today's meeting is we are tracking so that the strategy that we laid down absolutely holds. That we should hit at the end of 2022, we will hit even using what we had done in 2021. So this is now about the next steps. And I think the reflection here is when this started, we started this process in 2011. We're a long way from the beginning. Do the math, it's 11 years. But we're a long way from the end. In fact, we don't know what the end is. God's faith, there is no end. So we continue forward. Next set of milestones. So to give you context, I said I'm not going to pile out numbers, and I'm really not intending to with this. But what it's really trying to do is give you the proportion of how our expenses go. I'm going to go through quickly each of these areas.
Alec, you might have to mute everyone. There's some background music coming in there now. So
yep, just hitting that now. So if you look at the structure, you can see that where the money goes. And obviously what we refer to as business, finance, and admin is about 40%. The beyond our borders, about 22%. The next biggest being the bishop's office at 13%. And then we hit ministry and program, about 10%. And then parish support lay support isn't actually zero, but it rounds to the percentages. Clergy support, communications, and governance are all less than 10. That just gives you an idea on basically just about a $1.7 million budget or current forecast, that's roughly where the money goes. What we'll do is next talk about what that looks like.
Alex, if I could interrupt for just a second, I'm not seeing any of your slide presentation or PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if anybody else is, but I'm not seeing it. It's Julie.
Yep, you should be able, if there is a, if you haven't selected the right view, you won't see the charts. So there is a button. This has happened to folks before.
I saw the first one at the very beginning, and then
Is everybody else seeing the charts all right?
No,
I can see them.
No, we're not seeing them.
Okay, well, let me do it a different way then. I'm not quite clear where that may have gone. I'm seeing them, I monitor by coming in on my iPad and I see them, but let me do it a different way. Hang on, stop sharing.
If I hit if I hit your picture on my screen, I see you. If then the little box appears with the slide on it, and then I just hit that again. Hit the slide, then the slide comes up and you disappear, or you go into a little box. If
Yeah,
that
let me you see, Julie, I'm just gonna go back and hit this other screen.
It works.
okay, I
for us.
see it now.
Okay, was
Thanks.
that okay for everybody now?
Yes, thank you.
That's weird. It was using a new feature they've added, which I'll have to go and figure out. My apologies. Microsoft is both a curse and a blessing at times.
I still don't see it, Alex.
Don't see the goals of this consultation?
Oh, there. What is the budget?
Yep.
Yep. Yep.
So, okay, there must have been a. So you should all now see the pie chart. That as I was, that just not intended to get into numbers. This is as far as we'll go, but it just gives you an idea of the proportions. And what we'll do over the next few minutes is just walk through what's in each of those. The last piece I'll touch before we get into the line to sort of the section by section is what we know about the budget now. So we know that 2021 parish income, accessible income, will be down from 2020. And as you know, 2021 income will be what creates 2023 CMM. So we know that parishes continue to have closures and issues there. And we know that the wage subsidy did not provide the buffer it did the previous year. So we're still modeling that stuff out, but what we know is income overall will be down. We know that the income from the Administrative Allocation Fund will be up. It doesn't go to the operating budget, but it is a piece of our financial package. We know that interest rates will rise, and that's good and bad, because of course interest rates on your savings can be a good thing. Interest rates when you're borrowing money, and we do run a line of credit, basically because the interest rate on the line of credit is significantly lower than the return we get on our investments. So, but as interest rates rise, we will adjust that. Inflation is a much larger factor. We've been running at the last few years at 2.1, 2.2% inflation. For the month of May, I just read that inflation was at 7.7%. And so we know that is, for the first time since the 80s, we'll be dealing with inflation as a factor. We know that we're living in a post-COVID world. And we know that affects a wide range of things. People's coming to church. It affects, programs. It affects where people are at in terms of their personal perspective. So all of those things are variables. We know that we're tracking to a smaller deficit than what the budget called for, but it's still significant. It's still just under $100,000. So we've tracked against it and taken steps to keep it down, but we are still going to come out of it with a higher level expenditure. Last thing I'm going to just mention is then that this is what the conversation will come back to. This is the basics of the form that'll go up for those to send written stuff in after. But where we're going to go is try and focus on three things that we would put on the list of things we want to do more of. Where's the areas we would prioritize? Do more of these. And then the questions will be how much more? And what's the outcome or impact of that? At the same time, knowing that we don't have great flexibility, we need to think about what do we do less of? And looking again at three things there to try and come back to three main things. How much less? And what's the outcome or impact of that? So that's just to frame your thinking as we start to go through these. This will be the questions we kind of work back to is three things we do more of, three things we do less of. How much more or how much less? And what's the impact of more or the impact of less? So starting into the areas, the first one is reasonably straightforward. It's where does our income come from? So about 3/4 of it, and this is decreased. Our reliance on CMM has been a strategy that longer term we've been working at. It used to be 90%. We've now got it down to about 75%. But 75% of the income comes as CMM from our churches. Investment income is about 7%. That does not include restricted funds, and that does not include ministry allocation fund. So those are because that money does not go into the operating fund income, that those funds are restricted. And then fees account for about another 16%. And those fees are areas like the investment fund, management fee, the insurance, archives, certificates, all those kinds of things. That's the other piece. So as we start into the areas within the budget, and so what I've chosen to do is just use these broad areas. These are the headings in our financial planning and our financial reporting. So the first one is the bishop's office. Obviously, we are episcopally led and canonically, synodically governed. Bishop's stipend, housing and benefits, bishop's assistant, who also provides registrar services, including all the licenses that are done, travel for the bishop, and then other expenses. So that is one category of expense that is obviously the first one we track as an episcopally led. The second, then, as you recall, the largest is business, finance, and admin. So this captures a wide range of areas, but it includes the executive officer or executive archdeacon, includes the finance officer, it includes the accounting staff and admin, service and support staff, and that's both stipend and benefits. It includes our facility costs, particularly for the Diocesan Center. It includes our archives. It includes the PR work we do. Someone goes, what PR work do we do? Well, as things like CBC or CTV or any of the new agencies that contact or deal with certain topics that become news, that becomes a major focus for a time. And so that's an area that's handled. Human resources, and that's an area that's handled at several levels. It's handled for diocesan staff, both in terms of the management and policy for the clergy, and in a great many cases for supporting parishes with HR. We, of course, provide central payroll for the diocese. There's about 100 odd on payroll. There's our accounting services, keeping track of it all, managing it all, PAG management system and the resourcing for that, which is provided for parishes. Increasing amounts of financial consulting, so dealing with the CRA, assisting and sometimes preparing T3010s and those types of things, helping with green sheets. Some churches, as they now start to become strained financially, providing financial consulting with them in terms of how to look at their expenses and work forward. The insurance program, both the management with the national program, management of the billing, the management of claims, all of that piece in there. Sadly, we have legal, as we have to deal with a wide range of things from selling real estate through places where the diocese or one of our churches is being taken at legal action, dealing with employment law, dealing with environmental law, all the pieces that come through it. We manage the investment fund with the resources from here. That's about a $22 million fund and another $1.5 million in the trust funds. Do the work with the BAO and our cemeteries, and of course, general office and administration. So that's the business, finance, and admin area. Communications, and of course, this is one that is a very active part of diocesan life. Communications officer, expenses there, the website, e-news, bishop's messages, the print newspaper with the dialogue, social media accounts, photography and video ministries that record part goings-ons, posterity and for ongoing publicity, and then supporting online ministries through COVID. A great deal of help here in terms of how do you go online? What are the best things you can do, and what kind of products do you need to help do that? In the governance category, we do, of course, do a formal audit. And so we have an audit firm that's appointed by council. And each year, the financial statements of the diocese are consolidated and audited. That is a full audit pack, which includes going through the transactions so the auditor can make a statement that they fairly represent what's gone on and that they are compliant with accounting standards. They also provide us with financial assistance. For example, we were doing SUS. They provided us with consulting in terms of making sure we got it right and avoided being audited. It includes any costs for Synod Council. It includes costs for Synod that go beyond and the planning costs. And then costs related to canons and governance. So that's all in the governance area. Under clergy support and development, and this falls into a few areas. There is the path to ordination for clergy, whether that's through diaconate or through eventually being priesthood, that the work there with developing, encouraging, supporting through, for example, through MDiv programs. We also, as a province, support OPCO, which is basically taking provincial level and supporting and coordinating with the seminaries to make sure that we are connected and that they receive support to continue to create academically and through the training that they do, the clergy that we need. As well, and then as new clergy are ordained, there is support for them through some grants and some pieces there. And then as they come on board, there's support with things like sabbaticals. As we relocate clergy, there's parish support for relocation costs. There is bursaries, post-grad, those types of things that all occur and support the clergy. We do have an employee and family assistance program that is a fairly significant investment that is there for clergy and staff in terms of one-on-one personal support through an outside agency. Of course, we support deanery and archdeaconry activities. There is lay support and development. The lay education group, which again, in the wake of COVID, looking to drive lay development and for lay ministries. Obviously, one of the large ones there is our lay readers. There is money in the budget for the lay readers and their programs, and for general lay development, which also can include bursaries. That used to go through the training and development, which is now focused on clergy. It now goes through the lay side. There's a range of things to support parishes. Stewardship development, and through the stewardship committee, congregational development, often through congregational development committee, but we also bring assistance in when needed as we do work in restructuring or remanaging in terms of how ministry structures are. We work on that front. There is our cathedral grant as we support the life of our cathedral as part of our diocese. We do, when parishes get into financial challenges, we do have a viability policy where we work with churches to ensure that they get the current situation under control, and that going forward that they're able to put a plan in place to deal with their finances, and in cases that includes some forgiveness. So we bank that each year in the budget and then hold it for use as we need it. There's a fair bit of work goes into developing that. There's HR support, whether that's with the clergy, but often if, as you deal with HR situations in the church, many churches have lay employees. And as you get into situations, there's support required to help ensure that we meet ethically and legally the standards that we need to. There's legal support, and our churches do get named in suits or do work to avoid being named in a suit. So we provide legal support there, provide general consulting, and that's more and more we're supporting there. Screening and faith is an important part, and that's again targeted at the parish. And pandemic support. We've done a lot in the last few years around working with the pandemic. On the ministry and program side, of course, there is the Archdeacon of Ministry and Program. So there's stipend, housing, and benefits there. Travel related to that. We have a joint position with the Archdiocese on justice and peace, and we support. And right now, that's one of our clergy that is the coordinator. We support that from our budget, as does the Archdiocese. Our doors, our refugee work. which is a major centerpiece of our direct ministry as a diocese. That too is shared with the Archdiocese, but there's a significant investment from our side, supported also by our foundation. We have our Green Group, and again, you heard on the last Warden's Treasurer's call, some of the things that they're doing, again, with a particular focus on God's creation, but supporting churches to meet their commitment to that. And then we do work with a number of other organizations, and sometimes there are donations that go to that. So that's ministry support development. And then we have beyond our borders, our national church proportional gift. Basically, we use our assessable income, and we provide 20% of our income up to the national church as the proportional gift to support the work of the national church. That ranges from everything, including the office of the primate and the pieces that support there, but some of this work around the Council of the North, supporting now our Indigenous ministries, supporting the work of the committees that work on things like worship and resources there, the groups that work with international and feed into things like PWRDF, that a lot of the activities the national church is involved in, which we feed to the national church. We also have our provincial synod assessment. Provincial synod is not always as visible, although I am going to be working on making it a little more visible. But the work there is all things that are very important to us. So we send money up to the provincial level, which pays for the work that's happening there. And there's growing work in areas like seniors and in areas like homelessness. There is the work that's done to support some of our practical life, like the BAO. There's work with when Walkerton happened. The province was able to marshal the influence to get the proposed legislation change that would not put our small churches, so you could not have water, and would be a big issue. So those kinds of things are at the provincial level. And of course, the province is responsible for a range of things canonical. And then finally, and it came up last year this year, because every 10 years, normally there is a Lambeth held, which is a global meeting of all the bishops from around the world. I believe there's over 1,000 of them. They meet, hosted by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and they meet in the UK. And our bishop will in fact be attending Lambeth. But of course there's costs that we bear for that. And so that's one of our items. And then finally, as we have provincial and national synods, there are chunks of costs that we bear, just like our synod in the diocese costs money. We contribute to the expenses of that as well. So that all is in that bucket called Beyond Our Borders. So just to recap, right, that's having walked through these 10 categories, this is exactly the same chart, but simply to now reestablish for you the scale, what they were. And so I'll click back to that in a moment, but what I now like to do is first of all ask questions of clarification, and then just to make sure we've all sort of framed what these buckets are. But then we will move to the discussion around the more ofs, less ofs, what's important. So are there any questions for clarification around what these things are? Carly, your hand up?
Yeah, I just don't know all of the acronyms. So CM&M?
CMM is Common Ministry and Mission. And that is also in other dioceses, it may be called apportionment. So that is, in this diocese, it is, we work out a parish's assessable income. That's like there's certain things are excluded, but your assessable income rate is 20%. And then that is what the church, based on 2 years ago. So 2022, we used 2020's assessable income. And that 20% is what the church pays up to support the work of the diocese.
Okay. And what is CAG management?
That is pre-authorized giving. So that's where your folks are, automatic debits or credits.
Yeah.
All valid questions, by the way, and thank you, because we do tend to speak in Nortel what we used to call TLAs, three-letter
acronyms. Yeah.
Yeah. We have to have a TLA for TLAs.
Yeah. And the other one, I wasn't sure what it meant, was screening and faith.
So screening and faith is our Safe Church program. So that is the training that Archdeacon Varley leads around the right practices in your church and around CPICs and all those types of things. So, yep, that is the diocesan program there.
Okay. Thank you for your clarification on those.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. Anybody else have any clarifying questions? Tricia? Oh, hand up, then down.
Okay, I do have a question. What is the ministry allocation fund? You mentioned it a couple of times.
So in the canon changes of 2018, when we did our canon and constitution, we now take any property and assets of churches that close or sell, anything that, because at the end of the day, all assets are diocesan. So now when we sell property, those funds and any other assets the church has go into the ministry allocation fund. That fund is controlled by Synod Council. At this point, the only what it's set up is there's been the new ministry fund set up, which those of you that are familiar with the REACH grants and eventually the stretch grants, that's where the funding comes from. Is for those grants will come out of the ministry allocation fund, the new ministry fund there. So that fund at the end of last year sat around $700,000. And based on some things we have coming next, that fund will probably go just north of 2 million by the end of this year. So that fund will create, just again, I'm just using rough numbers, will create about 100,000 a year of income based on our standard return.
Okay, thank you.
Joseph, I see your hand up.
Yes, I'm looking at the 2022 expenditures forecast. What assumptions were made to produce this and how much flexibility is there? How is it different from last year?
2022 forecast, sure. I mean, the forecast, basically what we do is, of course, we do the budget before the year and it's approved. As each quarter goes by, I updated this one a little early, but what we do is we look at the actuals, what the actual results for the what's passed, and then we look at the balance of the year, what's in the budget, then we adjust. That's what we create the forecast with. So that's our best forecast, which has right now, the numbers you're seeing are actuals to the end of May. And then the forecast, which is often the budget remaining by month, but adjusted for things we know. You know, I know that the bishop's expenses for Lambeth are going to hit us shortly. So it's adjusted into what our forecast is. So that's the current forecast. That is our best view of what the end of the year is going to look like.
Okay, and so this pie chart is similar to what it was last year and will be similar to what will be next year. Is that correct?
Well, it is similar. It's not, yeah, because at this percentage levels, yep, it's the proportions will be very similar to what it looks like next year. That's some of the question. That's why we've got it here, is to look at, do we want to change what that looks like and what would that mean to do so?
Okay.
So Clark?
Yeah, it seems to me that when we look at next year, the big question is how much flexibility is there?
And that's going to depend on the area. You know, there are certain things we have flexibility on. There are certain things that would be much more difficult to have flexibility on. For example, we are an Anglican diocese. We will have a bishop. We can, you know, we have a lease. That's a legal document. Can we get out of the lease? Yes, but it will cost money to do so. So it's always a case of what flexibility there is. In certain areas, there's more flexibility. In other areas, there's areas of flexibility, like we could decide we wanted to spend less on payroll, but unless we actually take person out, you don't change the cost base much. So there is flexibility, but at this point, it would take alignment in order to achieve change. That's why we're having the discussion now in June.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And have you gone through a thought process of what the income is likely to be in 2023?
We have gone through a high level process, and I believe it will be that the CMM will be down. That we expect. The detail of the how much exactly, that's some work we'll do over the summer months.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Well,
yes, Alex. I have a sneaking suspicion I ought to know the answer, but remind me. The Ministry Allocation Fund, when it generates income, does that income come back to the Ministry Allocation Fund, or does it go into just the general fund?
It goes back to the Ministry Allocation Fund, but Synod Council controls the allocation of that money.
Right.
So in theory, there could be a decision. One option would be to allocate some of that income into a particular piece of work, for example.
Okay. I'm just a follow-up question, and I know we don't want to talk a whole lot about numbers, but my sense is at this point, the Ministry Allocation Fund is not getting a lot of requests. I could be wrong. I wonder if at some point in time it could be considered to cap that at a certain amount, and then have proceeds from sales come in to assist with the regular budget, or set aside another fund like the rectory fund that we have here in Kingston.
And I think one alternative for us is to say, yep, and I would, again, understanding the intent when that canon was written, that, you know, but it would be perfectly valid to say, if, for example, as a first step, that we would council would authorize drawing, say, leave it at income for the moment, that says this amount of income would be used to fund program pieces within the diocesan budget. And in theory, in the longer term, we could get to a point where the CMM basically funds the structural parts.
Yeah.
The infrastructure and the things we require. The programmatic stuff comes from combination of other things that aren't targeted for that. And those are but that builds a type of discussion that I believe we need to have.
Yeah, I just think back to some parish experiences where, you know, a parish might have a monstrous cemetery fund, and great, the cemetery will be well looked after, but the building and the clergy and the lay ministry have all dried up until they were dead, but didn't quite qualify for the cemetery fund.
And so we have, and again, every situation has uniqueness wrapped around.
Oh,
I
yes.
agree. There's, as we move forward, how we fund, I think, but I think the good news for us is that we do have some options. In the same way that we decided to use the SUS money from the diocesan side to support parishes.
Mhm.
Right? I think that's the kind of thinking we can apply in order to do some of this.
Really, thank you.
Any other questions for clarity? So what we've kind of got now is an hour. And with that as the back, it's whoops, wrong screen. Without, and again, don't want to get down and saying we should take $100,000 from here and move it to there, but rather at the level of things that we believe we should do more of. And there are things we know, for example, more parishes are struggling with accounting. More parishes are struggling with, you know, T3010s and EAO forms and all of that. Well, there are potentially things we can do to support that. And so there's, I think one of the opportunities for us is out of this discussion to start a number of other discussions that lead us to deliberate things to help work the life of our churches, which is what at the end of the day we all are. So it really then comes to discussion we'd now like to have and kind of shift to, from my perspective, from speaking mode to listening mode. And what are the things we want to do more of? And then following that, you know, knowing that we've got to do less of something anyway, is what things can we either do less of? And that's why I framed it as it could be we do less, or we could do it in a different way that has a different investment. And then we always have to look at cost or impact. It's fine to say we don't need payroll. Okay, how a church is now going to have to do their own payroll. Okay, we can do that. Is that the outcome we want? Do we want to have less? We don't want to do fill in the blank. So I'm basically going to turn the floor open to, I'd suggest let's look at the first grouping first. What do we do? What are the candidates to do more of? Oh,
I think, I know for myself, one of the things we have to do more of is in the business and administration, finance and administration. We're coming up to a year. A year ago, we had, I think, 2.5 people working in that section. We're now down to 1.5. And it shows, not laying blame anywhere, where, you know, things are a little slower. There's been some miscommunication, and I know a lot has fallen on the desks of the 1.5 that are left. So I would really like to see us get back to having, you know, a couple of full-time support people there.
Okay, noted, and that was, I think, just to point out, that was a deliberate strategy.
Yeah.
Partly because of where we're trying to shift into, there's a lot of things moving underneath, but also to try, and that's been one of the major contributors to the lower deficit. We've saved some money there. Yep. No, but understand that is at this point, that is where capacity and ability too. Yep, absolutely. Hand up, I guess. Joseph, you got your.
Yes, I have my hand up. I think what we have to do more of, and a lot more of in the diocese, has to do with fifth mark of mission. As most people probably know, I'm speaking from the Green Group. We have done a lot of work, and I think that there is not sufficient awareness of the seriousness of the state of the environment. It is not just climate change, it's biodiversity, it's plastic pollution, it's increasing water deficits, and the list is pretty long. And we as Christians have as much, probably more responsibility, because it's part of our faith. It's foundation through the fifth mark of mission. And we know that some churches are being quite active, but many are not. And I think in the diocese, there is a need to increase the profile of the importance of the first mark of mission and the activities of individual churches and parishioners, and also increasing the visibility of this aspect in the program of the diocese. So it would probably fit under the parish support and stewardship. As some of you know, we've done a lot of work on the website. It's now far richer in terms of content and so on, but the action has to be by individual parishioners and churches. And the synod last year recognized this on the issue of climate change, and there's a commitment that was made to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by 50%. And now there's a need for the churches to take that on and see how they can handle it. And those churches will probably need, or very likely need, support. And so one possibility is to establish a fund similar to the Reach and Stretch grants, where churches could propose certain activities that then would be considered by the council and approved for action that would actually result in reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And there are possibilities for other areas as well.
Hey, thank you. I'm again trying to now work through how that reflects. So I think at the end of it, you hit, because what I look at is, so what do we do? And so you're suggesting that a program of grants be put in place to support that mark of mission.
Yes, basically.
Okay. Thank you, Joseph. Julie, I see you've got your hand up next.
Hi, Alex. I just have a question about what you said in regards to the diocese taking on more of the church finances. I find that interesting, but I really need to know more about how that would work in order to say, yes, I would like to see that happen. I don't know if this is the right venue for you to explain that, but.
Sure, and what I'll do is give you the short version, because obviously it's a very complex topic. and historically one we'd never go near. But recognizing that more churches are having trouble keeping bookkeepers as people age, their ability and skill to be able to do these things become a problem. And the second thing is that we want people where their time and energy go to be able to go into ministry more so than administration. So one of the things we've done is we've re-architected our finance systems, and we've moved everything into the cloud. That's got a whole lot of reasons. But what we've done is things like now you can just email in expenses. Then they go into an approval process that shows up, for example, in my in a web browser for me. I get an email that says you've got a bill that needs to be approved. And once two of us approve it, then it gets paid. Joyce goes in, and then at that point, it goes with an e-transfer to pay it. We could do that with churches, because obviously the church wants to control their expenditures. They don't want us. And so they would have control of their bank account. They would have control of what's approved. We do this now with some churches with where there's no more central treasurer, and you're dealing with mileage and shared between churches, mileage, cell phone, the other things that are common. We've got helped several parishes get rid of a central treasurer role, because we can just, you send your expenses in, the wardens approve it, and then we pay it, and it gets distributed the same way your payroll account does. So there's a lot, and then at the end of the month, the idea being we've built a standard reporting pack, which we'd work through with churches. So every month you get a set of statements. And by the way, one of the benefits of that is that then you can hit a button and have your T3010 totals and have your totals for your green sheet. So I think there's a range of things we can do there. Each church would have their own instance, their own version of our software. They would have their own control of it. So that concept is one that we've talked about, and we actually this year we want to try and start running some pilots. But COVID slowed us down, and being down a body slowed us down. But that's the goal: is not take away your control, but take away the bookwork. That's the concept. And so what I would see us doing is basically having a session like this to talk about who's interested. If you're interested, great. If you're not, thanks. That's good too. And then what would it look like? And we sort of walk through and say, here's 2 or 3 models. Let's pick one and let's try a few churches. Get the kinks out and then try a few more. You're welcome. Deb.
Yes, hi. Thank you for taking my question. I'm concerned with the aging of our clergy in the Diocese of Ontario, and I'm wondering what efforts we're going to be putting into active recruitment, more so than passive recruitment, and how we're going to allocate some of the funds that we have for actively supporting our current clergy as they continue to age as well.
So I'll ask the bishop to speak. We just came from a provincial event, and I'll ask the bishop. The other thing is, you know, we've considered a time machine and we've considered cloning, but neither of those at this point have worked out well. So Bishop, if you could sort of give the update from the conference we were at this week.
Yeah, that's a very good question to ask, because it's a question that every diocese is grappling with, and we'll start with the identification of those discerning a call to ministry and supporting them through that, and also in terms of recruitment of clergy to all dioceses. It's a real issue right now, which is what precipitated this conference that we were just at earlier this week. And the name of the conference was supporting and forming, or helping, assisting to develop clergy for tomorrow's church, and every diocese was represented. The Ontario, one of those acronyms that we had on the screen there is OPCOT, which is the Ontario Provincial Council for Theological Education. And it representatives from OPCOT is there. It's chaired by the former Bishop of Ottawa, Bishop John Chapman. The heads or representatives of all the seminaries were present at this conference as well. And it was facilitated by our provincial synod. So it's one of these issues that we've elevated up to the provincial level in Ontario. So that's our 7 dioceses, because we are all facing huge problems. Just to give you an example of that, and this is on the recruitment side. In the Diocese of Toronto every year, and Toronto is one of the largest dioceses in the country, Toronto, New Westminster, similar size. In the Diocese of Toronto, they have annually a day where they bring together people who are discerning call and vocation within the parish. It's an interview day. There's a lot of things that happen in that. And normally, historically, there are usually 20 to 30 people that attend that. These are people that may not eventually go on to the ministry, but they are, I guess the phrase we were using at the conference was vocationally curious and beginning the first steps along the way. Normally 20 to 30 every year. This year when they had the conference, they had 5. And they're having a lot of conversations now in Toronto about that, whether this is a COVID anomaly, whether it's something they need to be looking at, because it is a huge challenge. And it's and how we have identified clergy in the past. The way that we have done that is always being through the parishes. In a parish, somebody's involved in the life of the parish. Usually the parish priest or others within the congregation begin to notice that an individual may have a vocation to the priesthood or to the diaconate, and eventually that comes through to the bishop, and then there's a process that's in place for that, and the training and development committee of the diocese is involved in it. There are fewer and fewer people that are making that decision to step forward. There's a lot of reasons for that. The movement of clergy is a huge issue. We no longer have, in many places, a very few parish rectories. The rectories have been sold off because of budgetary concerns, maintenance and upkeep of rectories, and in place of that, housing allowances put in place, which become part of clergy being able to build up some equity in property, so that when retirement comes, going in now to the aging side of it, it's one of the things that when I was first in ministry, those pension statements would come in, I'd throw it in a drawer somewhere and forget about it. Now when the pension statement comes in at this age and stage of life, it gets a lot more scrutiny in this house. So those are issues that are coming up. So clergy that had been in provided housing for all of their career would come to retirement and have absolutely no equity at all and very little in the way of investment. So a lot of parishes went from having rectories to moving to housing allowances. The problem that we face now is that if someone is considering a call, how do they, if they have a property, can they divest of that property? Can they purchase a property in another place? Is there issues around family, spousal employment? All sorts of things have made it very difficult for clergy to consider moves in the way that it used to be done. So that those are all challenges. So we have that on the side of clergy moving through their time in ministry, but also on the identification of the considering convocation. Conference raised up. We're looking at how training of clergy happens. Many of you will know that traditional way to when clergy, if they were interviewed and there was a definite call there and they moved to the part of training, that meant a residential Masters of Divinity program for 3 years at an accredited seminary, which would also include courses in supervised pastoral education. The ability of people to dedicate 3 years of their life at particular stages of life, whether somebody's coming into it later on or not, that becomes more of an issue. So looking at how the training happens was a big part of this conference. And then the questions that the seminaries asked, what are we training for? We need to know what the church is and the challenges of the church in the future are going to be that we want to be training our clergy for in terms of leadership ability, in terms of how to lead within the life of a parish or within the diocese, and those sorts of things. So the training modules that are put in place, and the phrase that I used at the conference is the way we traditionally have done it is that we usually wrap the individual around the program. We have a cookie cutter program, everybody's got to fit it. Now what we're trying to do is figure out how to wrap that whole journey from discernment through ministry, and then continuing on in ministry in terms of continuing education and support like that. How do we wrap the program around the individual and to be able to support them as they're moving through their time there? That's what this conference is all about. So we brought this up to the provincial level because all 7 of our dioceses in the Ecclesiastical Province of Ontario are dealing with precisely these issues and these concerns. How do we look at supporting clergy? And Alec had touched on some of the issues here around inflation, around cost of living, around investments, around all of those sorts of things that the clergy rely on in terms of their day-to-day life and in terms of their long-range planning. So those are things that we want to bring up to the provincial level so that we all come together in a series, I think, of about 3 major topics were raised to consider moving forward in a 9-month time window. And then that's going to come to the Provincial Synod Council, which is meeting in September, I believe. I haven't got the exact date. So they're going to be bringing that. The one that I'm part of is on developing a vocations conference at a provincial level, which would engage not only the dioceses and the that would be involved in bringing in so that high level look at that call and vocation, and is specifically focused on the ministry of priesthood. That's the stipendiary ministry that we have, or paid accountable ministry it's referred to sometimes, and to be able to work at that, but also to fold in and bring together representatives from parishes. There are parishes that at the conference were referred to as incubator parishes. They you think of the number of people that have come out of those parishes and had vocations to the ministry. You can think, perhaps some of you on the screen today can think of your parish and individuals that have come out of your parish and have gone on to vocation to the priesthood and are serving the church in various capacities, all over the place. So that was one of the things we wanted to do, was be more intentional about how we identify those that are achieving vocation, looking at vocation and supporting them, and supporting the people who will support them and identify that. So that's also going to be part of this conference. So a number of folk that were there, including some of the seminary folk, are very, very interested in that possibility, trying to put that together in short order. So those are a few things that are happening from a budgetary perspective here. I think we need to look at that in terms of how we support those kinds of initiatives out of the diocese that are happening, because, if we can identify individuals, and in our diocese, we're a small diocese, and so we'd never have a huge number of what's referred to as sponsored students or postulants at any one time. We have some folk right now who are giving consideration to a vocation, and that's very important in supporting them and being able to bring them to a larger conference together with other people who are walking the same path. And I think that that would be a very good thing. Active recruitment, a very important issue. It used to be that when the House of Bishops met, we would discuss vacancies that we would discuss clergy that we have who may be looking for a move. And when somebody talked about a particular ministry opportunity they had in their diocese, maybe we had someone within our diocese that would be ready for a move, have indicated to me or to their bishop that they feel they've completed their call in their particular parish and they're ready to be considered for a move. And we would discuss that maybe they should apply for that. Given the shortage of clergy right across the country now, and the vacancies that we have in some cases, I know in one of our dioceses in Ontario, up to 28% of the parishes are clergy vacant, and very difficult to find people. So that conversation now is less about discussing who may be available as discussing what is available in terms of the ministry opportunity. So that means that we broader afield and have conversations. And there's conversations I'm having right now with clergy who are not from this country. And so again, that also impacts the budget, because if we have someone, we're having good conversation, we want to be able to bring them here, be able to introduce them to the diocese, in some cases, introduce them to the culture of the country, and find out if there's possibility of a good fit there. So that's going to be more in the future, and that will also have a budgetary impact as well. So that's a very good question. And thank you for raising it, because on the training and development side of it, I think coming out of this conference is still early days, but I think that's really going to what we're able to offer in terms of the identification of vocations, and also on the recruitment side, and supporting parishes that are able to raise up vocations within them.
And that does, as we talk about how parts of our budget interlink and interrelate, which the bishop described, that the money that comes from us to support the work of the province, the ecclesiastical province, that is an area that we all at these executive officer community, we talk about as we go forward. We need more and more things that we can do in common. And if you look at things where we can spend money once and solve it for 7 dioceses, even if there's a personalized flavor for each diocese, but we can put core competencies, core capacities and capabilities in place. And these are all important pieces that, we may not have the scope and the mass to be able to afford to have a real impact on some of these topics, but at the provincial level we do. And so it's another piece of how we can respond beyond just spending dollars ourselves. The other thing I think that just raises up, we often talk about money, but just as you know from our churches, financial capital is obviously an important thing, but human capital is really becoming more and more issue, and more the restriction for us. So how we find ways to better use our human capital, to use the time, the talents of people and people's faith to be able to move, as well as paying for it. That's the thought. Michael Reed, is anybody at St. Lawrence? We had some questions pop up online, but I'm always careful to make sure that those that have actually made the sojourn, that we don't ignore them. Are there any questions from your group? I see Mark looks like it may be somewhat lonely at Cataraqui, but just check with you folks and see if there's any questions. I'm sorry, Bill.
I don't think anybody has any specific questions here, Alex. I think we're just gleaning knowledge and information from all those that are sharing.
So we can take then and maybe change gears, because always a little more difficult is, so if we need to add, what do we do? What do we give? Where do we try and either, and I characterize this as how you spend less, but you may get more from it by doing it in a different way, by adjusting how it goes. So thoughts around things that may be less important. Always an awkward question. Let's go back to here. Anyone have any thoughts or and again, I realize this is having open and frank discussion without, this is not personal. This is about the things we can be better stewards of. At the end of the day, I think you find Wayne, the bishop, and I are always coming back to, we are stewards of what we have as a diocese, and that includes the budget. Carly.
My sense, having not sort of drilled down too deeply, is that anything that we were going to take away or subtract or cut would really be almost nickel and diming. And I think that's a microeconomic issue, right? So we're really looking at what we can do, right? We're not looking at where we can achieve cost savings on things. Right?
And but less so in terms of, we can figure out how do you spend $1.50 a gallon, not $5 a gallon. That's one discussion. I agree. That's a macro.
Mm-hmm.
But is there in any of these areas, is there a piece that we could say, perhaps we don't do that anymore? Right? I think that's more is there areas that we would look at and say, we can either do a lot less. We'll always drive efficiencies. That's something that's our job.
Right.
But are there areas that we have spending in that we should be asking, should we continue to do this? Or I give up this to get that. And some of this will come, and I'll talk about the follow-on from this in a minute, but just does anybody have any thoughts of anything that struck you as perhaps we should look at that?
I mean, certainly, I think communications is really important, and I think you could even bundle that into the financial and administrative support, because that's sort of what it is, right? It's not its own separate bucket. It's the people who are creating these messages going out are all of the same people and messages that are being supported in the business and finance and general administration, right?
For the most part, we work, and that is, we work as a team.
Yeah.
And there's message creation, and then there's the message delivery, the pipes and the content. But that is what we've tried to do is just be descriptive enough, because some people do struggle with when numbers get too big, when it gets too big a bucket. So we have kind of tried. It was also an area that was very controversial a few years back, because we had staff that did nothing but a diocesan newspaper in print, and there was a shift from that. So that, I think, but it's a good observation, Kari, that perhaps we look at how we categorize things, and adjust some of that. Certainly, communications piece is an active area for us.
Right. Do we have someone here from each parish today?
We've got about, counting the 5 in Brock, we got somewhere around 21, 22 people. So we've probably got about a third of our churches, sorry. You're around a third of our churches. You got a few diocesan people on the call.
Yeah, I think it would be nice if we had a greater engagement from the churches in big thinking meetings like this, right? If this is a high level 30,000-foot view of what's important to us, hard for just a few of us to make those, not a richness to the discussion.
And that's where, again, and time and day is always a challenge. Part of the idea is to use our communications abilities. People can look at this on Monday night, and we'll have and I'll talk about how that'll happen. You can input to it, even though you weren't part of this discussion today.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be part of the greater conversation. And that's the beauty of today's technologies.
Agreed.
Bill Clark.
Yeah, Alex, looking at beyond our borders, I've always been a solid supporter of the national church as a member of General Synod. But is our current giving, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Are we giving more than is legally required? I know we did that in the past to assist, or are we giving the expected amount?
So a couple of years ago, the decision was made. So the national church is not like CMM, which is a canonic requirement. Churches do not have an option. At the national level, they don't have the canonic strength to prescribe it. So they provide what is referred to as a proportional gift. So what they basically do is ask you to contribute 26% of your assessable income. That's the same kind of thing. What comes up from parishes, investments, and that stuff. What we did a number of years ago, after some fair debate at Synod Council, was a decision was made that we would, and by the way, different dioceses take different approaches. In terms of, yeah. So what this diocese decided, and again, this will be a discussion at council going into the budget, is that we will give the national church in the same proportion as our churches give us. So basically, we went from 26% over a couple of years, we reduced to 20%, which is the same proportion that our churches give us, diocesan level of their income, but we give the same 20% at the national level. That's the formula to this point we've used. We will then have to have a discussion. Now and there's all kinds of complexity. I will put on the table, the national church last year generated a surplus.
Well, I'm aware of that, and that's why I was kind of wondering if this gives us a little bit of wiggle room. If I'm not saying in perpetuity, but for a year or two, because of our own needs.
Yeah, and that's a question I think we need to ask. Last year they gave us a month holiday that basically said 1 month you don't need to pay. Those are questions, Bill, I think are good. I was fortunate, blessed to sit with the primate. The primate attended the conference the bishop described this week. I guess it's not such a good thing now that I was sitting at a table with her. Now I've got COVID, but anyway, we did have some of this discussion. There is a new controller and obviously a new general secretary. So that'll be some conversation I would expect us to have before council comes to approve whatever it is we put forward. And I'd expect this will be a discussion at council next week. On my list.
Okay, thank you. And you're not saying that the primate gave you COVID, are you?
I am not. I'm more concerned that potentially I might have given the primate COVID.
Yeah. Well, I'm not ready to move up just yet, so don't worry.
All right. Mark, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Alex. Just to circle back for a moment here on the communications piece, and speaking from the communications office and as the editor of the Diocesan newspaper, I just wanted to say, now that's one area I think we could look at, and I know we've discussed that at the Synod office. Years ago, of course, the paper was printed 10 times a year, and then that was reduced when I came on board to now it's a quarterly newspaper. Now, we still pay, of course, to have it printed and have it shipped and delivered with the Anglican Journal. But I would be curious to know what folks think about, those on the call, and of course, those who may be watching this later on and comment on it, is as people consume more and more content online, and now the Anglican Journal has launched a new website called Anglican News, and they're inviting dioceses to get on board and actually host their paper online. Some of them have done that already and stopped printing. is that something we can look at? Is that something we could do in the future, is to stop printing the paper? It doesn't mean the paper goes away, but it takes on a new format, a new style, or a new version of itself as an online piece. That is something I'd be curious to hear from people. I mean, it's not a massive cost savings if you add up our printing and shipping costs. Just off the top of my head, I think you're somewhere around 10,000 a year. I could be off with that. I just don't have the numbers right in front of me, but every bit helps.
Mark, the folks here at St. Lawrence all agree that we're ready to get rid of the paper copies. I think most people do go online now, and with the e-News Weekly and other places, and the Anglican National online news service as well, that we're probably ready to let that part of our communications leave in the past. So we're all supportive. I think that's a really great idea, and it also saves paper and ink and other things environmentally that we want to be responsible for as well.
Thanks, Michael.
Any other feedback on that one? We do know from history that's at various moments has been a sensitive discussion, sometimes an emotional one. Was any other feedback on it? Time passes. Okay. Sylvia, I see your hand up. Lovely to see you online.
I'd like to say that, Mark, you've got about 5 more years before people in my age bracket who say, I don't have a computer, I can't get it online. Got about 5 more years, and there will be no one who's saying that. This is a little bit of research that I've been doing, because in other organizations I'm involved with, we're also deciding whether online or in reality is how to send our communications. So I think I'm in favor of it. There may be a few people who will still use that. I don't have a computer, that's not fair to me. So there you go. There's some anecdotal research I've been doing.
Yeah, I understand that, Sylvia, and we are kind of straddling 2 generations in that sense in terms of how people get their content, for sure. Good comment.
And perhaps there's other ways to work that too, that much like other things, it's something at the parish level that if there's someone who can't, you can try and look at get something printed locally. You know, a number of ways to try and work that for the if it's a handful of people, then you can deal with that more personalized way. Carly, see your hand up.
Just to, as somebody who's in a younger generation than people who are saying, I don't have a computer, I get a lot of news online, and I think that there's a weight to a physical copy of a paper that is nice, and I think that it's lastingness, you know, as it kind of hangs around and gets passed around. There's a value to that too, because I spend quite enough of my time online. I'm always happy to have the option to turn to something more tangible. So I don't think that it's just a generational issue and that you're going to age right out of it.
As I say, this is one of those discussions, it's multifaceted. And okay. Other questions or other areas you'd like to, we're just at 11:45. Any other? Bishop, you don't need to put your hand up, sir.
Well, I just thought I was excited because I'm technologically adept enough to put my hand up on the online. I'm just curious to hear what people might have to say about. I've been sort of cogitating on the idea. I think maybe Bill, you brought it up. I'm not sure if you did, but in terms of our ministry allocation fund and proceeds from that, and how Synod could look at allocations. We did come at a time. Bill would know this as chair of the Diocese of Ontario Foundation. I remember it was set up. The whole dream of that was that CMM would cover the institutional costs, the building, the salaries, all of those things that would be covered, and that the other side of things would be covered that way. And I thought it was an interesting thought around looking at it, and it can be looked at on an annual basis, depending on, if there's an idea. Now we're doing the Reach and Stretch program, and we're hoping that gets more up in the life of this, because it has a very strong missional focus. And one of the things that people have been saying to me is the missional focus of diocesan work, and how do we invest more in that so that it's mission, it's outreach, it's engaging the wider community, it's doing some of the things that we've talked about here this morning, such as Joseph raised around environmental concerns and how to support parishes that want to address that. There's a whole range of different things. But as that fund, and we know that fund will increase over time. I mean, that's, we're going to be the sale of properties. And just for people's information here, the Synod passed a resolution that before that goes into that ministry allocation fund, we tithe 10% of the gross proceeds. I think I'm right in saying the gross proceeds. The gross proceeds of those sales to the Anglican Healing Fund on our commitment to reconciliation, which is again another, it's not really programmatic side of it, but it's supporting the mission and ministry of the church as we're agents and ministers for reconciliation. I think that's worth some merit in when you're looking and can do a projection or a forecast annually to say, well, based on what we're seeing now, we're looking at a particular program. Right now, it's the Reach and Stretch program. Maybe there's other programs that will come up over time moving into the future that will draw more on that. But that's the whole purpose of why that is called a ministry allocation fund, so that we can allocate and look at that programmatic side. And I think that could have significant impact on the diocesan budget, looking at that. So it's making the investments that we have in the life of the diocese, making those work for us in terms of the kinds of things that we want to do that are ministry and mission and programmatically related for the building up of the church and the strengthening of the people who've made their vocation as disciples of Jesus Christ present here with us. And then CM nuts and bolts of the life of it, paying the lease, paying the salaries, paying those things that we have to deal with. I'd be interested in hearing what people have to say about that, because I think that's a conversation that has some merit in pursuing a little further.
Bishop, just to follow up on my earlier comments, which was around the idea of potentially capping the ministry and allocation fund at a certain, at $1 million mark, so there'd be sufficient funds, as it's currently being used. Eventually, one would like every parish to be engaged with this at some point, and that cap may have to be raised. But there are some immediate ongoing costs, both to the diocese and to our parishes, that are going to be going up next year. And I wondered if, yes, after we've paid our 10% to the First People's healing funds, if some of that fund, the remaining gross sale, could be set aside in a fund that could either directly pay towards the infrastructure of the diocese, or becomes a grant to parishes, much like those of us in the city of Kingston enjoy the Rectory Fund, as a way to help meet immediate costs. So again, it's just a part of the mix.
Other thoughts, questions, ideas? This is good dialogue. You know, I think our hope as well is that this conversation, you know, engages some others. It picks up, it plants some seeds that can then grow, and thoughts that expand. And, you know, much like we built a community with the wardens, treasurers, clergy call, there's a regular piece of dialogue, that these sorts of calls can develop a community as well, that we can facilitate staying in touch online and having conversations, because some of these ideas take people banting them back and forth. And we all see them differently. We come from different churches. We come from different size churches, different traditions, all of those differences, but that brings a richness. One of our hopes is that we can build on that to make us all better. So just as we start to hit towards the top of the hour, let me give you sort of the next step. We are going to take, as we always do, the recording of this charts, just like the warden and treasurer calls. They will go up on the website. That'll happen on Monday. And the form, that table, we'll do a little tidier version of that you can use to send in thoughts. What we're going to do is just, again, so it doesn't get lost, because, you know, some of us get a lot of emails in a day. We're on Monday, there will be a new email account. It's just called budget@ontario.anglican.ca. So instead of A. Pearson or M Moulton or W. Varley or M. Hauser, this will just be budget@ontario.anglican.ca. You'll be able to send in thoughts, send in questions, send in the form. Those that are listening post fact today, you'll be able to submit your thoughts to that same place. And basically, we will leave that open for capture for the next few weeks. That towards the end of July, we'll take some of the, we'll then begin the next piece of work, which will get us to the September package that we're going to work through. So that's kind of the window is for the next month or so to get input back into us. And whether that's fresh ideas, whether that's further thinking, whether it's more detailed thinking, or something, just a different perspective that you choose, that you come up with in the next little while. Please encourage those in your churches to get engaged. There is no requirement. This has to be a warden or a treasurer or a clergy. That anybody, you know, we are all, this is the diocese. We are all stakeholders in this. So the more people that get engaged, the better we are. Any other questions or closing comments before we turn back to the bishop? Let me thank you for your time and attention and your contributions today. Most appreciated. And I look forward to the next steps of this. And I look forward to the bishop now drawing us to a prayerful conclusion.
Thank you very much, Alec. And I want to extend thanks to you for putting together this session today, and for everyone who've attended, and for your input. It's very important. One of the things that they told us at this conference about vocations is that it's important to try to talk about vocations at every opportunity, and get it into the wool of the life of our church. And I would encourage the same thing on this, that for those of you that are on the call, to talk to people in your parishes that you've been on this call. The recording is up. There's an address to which you can submit your suggestions around high-level input pieces as the Synod Council begins to grapple with nuts and bolts and we move through that budget process leading to September, October, talk it up. I mean, talk about the various issues, talk about what you heard here today, talk about the things that you're passionate about, talk about the ideas that you have, and have those come in so that the counselors can have a really good cross-section of ideas and suggestions coming from the people of our diocese in the churches. You're kind of the pointy edge of ministry in the life of the diocese. You're in the parishes, you're in your communities, you've lived through the challenges of COVID and what that has meant. For a lot of you who are on the call here today, you're dealing with the challenges of what the pandemic's going to mean for the life of the church as we move through these, hopefully moving into an endemic time. But we'll carry on from there. So thank you so much for all that you're doing. And just as we close today, I would invite us all to join together and say the grace. With the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, be with us all evermore. Amen. Blessings, everybody. Enjoy this absolutely beautiful Saturday. And thank you for taking a couple of hours of it to be with us.